Before we begin this gripping chapter of history, we want to thank you for joining us. If you enjoy stories of incredible courage and ingenuity against impossible odds, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue uncovering these forgotten battles and the heroes who fought them. Now, prepare yourself for the green hell of New Guinea, near Buna, New Guinea, December 18, 1942, 03:17. The silence was the worst part. In this war, silence was never empty. It was full of waiting. It was the sound of 10,000 mosquitoes hovering near your sweat-drenched ear. It was the sound of your own heart thumping against the greasy, mud-caked fabric of your uniform. It was the sound of water dripping from a million leaves in the suffocating blackness. Sergeant Jack Malone, 216th Battalion, Australian Imperial Force, pressed his cheek harder into the slimy earth. He tasted rot. He smelled it. The whole island was a decomposing giant. "See anything, Bluey?" he whispered. Private Bluey Flanagan, gripping the wooden handle of his Bren light machine gun, didn't even turn his head. His eyes were wide, straining to find substance in the oppressive dark of the coconut grove. "Nothing, Sarge, but they're out there. I can feel them, like static in the air." Jack Malone felt it too. He was a digger, a volunteer, and before this, a ringer, a stockman from the vast, dry emptiness of Queensland. He knew how to wait. He knew how to read the ground, and this ground was screaming. His platoon, part of C Company, was holding the extreme left flank of the Allied line. To their left was a stretch of seemingly impassable mangrove swamp. To their front, a tangle of jungle so dense it was called the Green Curtain. Behind them, the beach. And in front of them, somewhere in that curtain, were the hostiles, Imperial Japanese Army forces. Fanatical, skilled, and masters of this terrain. A sound, not a snap, not a footstep. It was subtler. The sound of a single leaf being brushed. Jack's hand tightened on his Owen submachine gun. He nudged Bluey. "Where?" Bluey breathed. 10 o'clock, low." Bluey traversed the Bren, his knuckles white. The jungle held its breath. Then, a flicker of movement. A shadow detaching itself from another shadow. Not 1, 3, 4. They weren't charging. They were flowing like water around the platoon's forward pit. "Now," Jack commanded. The night exploded. Bluey's Bren tore the air with its distinctive hammering rip, rip, rip. Jack's Owen spat a stream of 9mm rounds. From the foxhole to their right, Private Kev Nolan opened up with his .303 Lee Enfield, the crack, 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 sharp and clear. Screams answered them, not of pain but of fury. Banzai! The shadows rose up. They were no longer ghosts. They were men coming on fast, bayonets fixed. A Japanese Juki heavy machine gun opened up from the darkness. Its sound a heavy, thudding thump, thump, thump that sent tracers sizzling over their heads. "Grenade!" Kev yelled. Jack saw the small, dark object arcing through the air. It landed short, but the concussion was brutal. A white-hot flash, a deafening crump. Jack felt a sharp, sickening impact in his left thigh, as if he'd been struck by a white-hot hammer. He cried out, a sound stolen by the gunfire. At the same time, the gunfire from Kev's pit stopped. "Kev!" Jack roared, crawling to the lip of his foxhole. "Kev!" No answer. The Juki stitched the ground where Kev's pit was, turning the earth to fountains of mud. "He's hit, Sarge!" Bluey yelled, slamming a new magazine into the Bren. "They're in the wire!" More hostiles were pouring through the gap. This wasn't a probe. This was an assault. Jack ignored the fire in his leg. He grabbed a sticky bomb, ripped the pin, and lobbed it. The resulting blast and spray of shrapnel cleared the wire for a moment. "Radio!" Jack shouted. "Get the captain. Tell him the flank's caving." Bluey fumbled for the hand crank radio, his hands shaking. "Dead, Sarge. Shrapnel must have hit it." Jack looked at his leg. Blood, dark and thick, was soaking his trousers. He looked towards Kev's pit. Silence. He looked at Bluey, a kid from Melbourne who'd lied about his age. They were cut off. The radio was dead. Kev was gone. And the Japanese were just getting started. The silence returned, heavier this time, full of menace. The attack had pulled back, but it wasn't a retreat. It was a preparation. "Well, Bluey," Jack grunted, pressing a field dressing against his bleeding leg. "Looks like we're in a bit of a pickle, mate." Allied HQ Buna, December 18, 1942, 06. To understand the desperation of Sergeant Malone's position, one must understand Buna. After the brutal, near-mythic fighting withdrawal along the Kokoda track, the exhausted but victorious Australian diggers had pushed the Japanese back to their coastal beachheads, Gona, Sanananda, and Buna. These were not towns. They were fortified nightmares. General MacArthur, desperate for a decisive land victory, had given a chilling order to the American 32nd Infantry Division, who were joining the fight: take Buna or don't come back. The problem was the terrain. This was not a battlefield, it was a swamp, a fetid, malaria-ridden expanse of mangrove jungle, coconut plantations, and deep, stinking mud. The Japanese had spent months preparing. They weren't just dug in, they were rooted. Their bunkers were masterpieces of interlocking fire, built from coconut logs, steel plates, and coral. They were impervious to mortars and grenades, and almost invisible until a soldier was 5 yards away. The diggers of the 216th, veterans of Kokoda, were skeletal. They were racked with malaria, dysentery, and jungle rot. Their green uniforms were bleached pale by sweat and sun and hung loosely on their emaciated frames. They were fighting alongside the Americans of the 32nd, a National Guard unit from Michigan and Wisconsin, who had been thrown into this meat grinder with inadequate training for this kind of warfare. They were brave, but they were suffering horrific casualties. The central problem was infiltration. The Allied line was a fiction. It was, in reality, a series of disconnected strongpoints and foxholes, separated by stretches of impassable jungle. But to the Japanese, no jungle was impassable. They moved through it like smoke, slipping between posts in the dead of night, cutting supply lines, hitting command posts, and creating terror. Sergeant Malone's platoon was assigned to Coconut Grove, the extreme left flank of the Australian position. It bordered a vast mangrove swamp that Allied intelligence had deemed unsuitable for major troop movements. Intelligence was wrong. For 3 nights, the Japanese had been using the swamp as a highway. They were bypassing the main Allied strength, filtering forces through the dead sector, and preparing to roll up the entire Australian line from the flank. Malone's tiny outpost wasn't just on the flank, it was the flank. The stakes were absolute. If Malone's position collapsed, the Japanese would pour into the rear area, severing the supply lines to the main force attacking Buna village. The entire campaign, bought with so much blood, could unravel in a single night. And now, with the radio dead and his position shattered, Jack Malone knew the collapse had already begun. C Company CP Bunker, December 18, 1942, 0830. They're ghosts, I tell you, absolute bloody ghosts. Captain Davies, CO of C Company, rubbed his red-rimmed eyes. He hadn't slept in 72 hours. His command post was a hole in the ground, roofed with palm logs that wept a constant muddy rain. 2 days ago, he said to his lieutenant, B Company sent a full patrol into that swamp. Nothing. Not a trace. Not a single man came back. No gunfire, no screams. Just gone. The routine had become a cycle of failure. Attempt 1. The daylight probe. A squad would be ordered to push into the green curtain to find the source of the infiltrators. They would move 50 yards and the jungle would erupt. A Juki gun, perfectly placed. Knee mortars, pinpoint accurate. The survivors would crawl back, carrying their wounded, having learned nothing. Attempt 2. The night ambush. Men would lie in wait, nerves screaming, staring into the black. The Japanese would slip right past them, hit the supply dump 2 miles behind them, and be gone before the ambush team even knew what happened. Attempt 3. The aggressive patrol. This was what Malone had been doing. Pushing forward, digging in, and waiting for the fight to come to them. It was a sacrificial tactic. The human cost was staggering. Men weren't just being neutralized. They were vanishing. Morale was at rock bottom. The heat was a physical weight. The stink of mud, cordite, and unburied dead was inescapable. The men's boots were rotting off their feet. We just don't have the men to plug every gap, the lieutenant said, his voice hollow. And the Yanks, they're stalled at the triangle. They're good lads, but they're not used to this. Desperation was a tangible thing, like the humidity. It was the knowledge that standard tactics, the ones they'd learned in the desert, the ones in the manuals, were useless here. The jungle didn't respect formations, it only respected cunning and brutality. "Where is Malone?" Davies snapped, looking at his map. His post was due to report 30 minutes ago. The radio operator shook his head. "Static, sir. Same as the B Company patrol." Davies's face hardened. He knew what that meant. Malone's post was gone. The flank was open. He had no reserves. "Get me B Company," Davies ordered, his voice tight with a terrible, failing resolve. "Tell them to prepare to pull back 200 yards. We have to shorten the line." It was a quiet, devastating admission of defeat. They were losing. Malone's Foxhole, December 18th, 1942, 09:14. Jack Malone was very much alive, but only just. The sun was up, transforming the oppressive dark into a blinding, humid greenhouse. The Japanese had pulled back at first light, as they always did. They would be back tonight. Kev was gone. His foxhole was a crater. Young Private Snowy Jensen, a kid from Tasmania, had crawled over from his position to join them. He was shaking, but alive. So it was 3 of them. Jack, with a pulsing deep wound in his thigh. Bluey, his nerves shattered. And Snowy, who was trying not to look at what was left of Kev's position. "They'll be back tonight, Sarge," Bluey whispered, cleaning the Bren gun with an oily rag. "And they'll bring friends." Jack nodded, his mind working fast. He was in agony, but the ringer from Queensland was taking over. "Out there, you didn't fight the land. You used it. You didn't fight a stampede. You herded it." He looked at the discarded equipment from the night's fight. His eyes settled on a piece of captured gear, a Type 89 grenade discharger, what the Allies called a knee mortar. It was a simple, elegant, and terrifyingly effective weapon. It was light, fired a 50mm grenade, and made a distinctive thwomp sound. He also saw the salvaged battery from their destroyed radio. It was weak, but he could feel a faint tingle of charge left in it. And then he saw his flare pistol, and a box of captured Japanese flares. A switch flipped in his mind. It wasn't an invention, it was a connection. He wasn't a soldier in the traditional sense. He was a trapper, and his mind, forged in the vast patient emptiness of the outback, saw the jungle not as a barrier, but as a set of pathways. "We can't stop them," Jack said, his voice a low rasp. "We don't have the men. We don't have the guns." Bluey and Snowy looked at him, their faces grim. "So," Jack continued, a strange feral light in his eyes, "we're not going to stop them. We're going to herd them." He crawled over to the knee mortar. "Bluey, what do you hear every night before they attack?" "The mortars, Sarge. Thwomp, thwomp. They're ranging us." "Exactly," Jack said. "And what do they do when we fire flares?" "They go to ground," Snowy offered. "Or they shoot at the flare." "Right." Jack laid out his insane, brilliant idea. "We can't be a company, but we can sound like one. We're going to build a ghost line." His idea was this. They would take the captured knee mortars and set them up in the swamp, 200 yards to their left. They wouldn't aim them at the enemy. They'd aim them at empty trees. They would use tripwires, slow-burning fuses, and the last dregs of the radio battery to set them off remotely. They would create a phantom platoon. "We make them think this," he said, gesturing to their ruined foxhole, "is just a listening post, and that the real strength is deep in the swamp. We make them waste their time, their ammo, and their men attacking shadows. We'll make them think the flank is heavily defended." "But Sarge," Bluey said, "what about us? When they figure it out, they'll come straight for us." "That's phase 2, mate," Jack said, grabbing the flare pistol. "We're not just building a trap, we're building a beacon." He knew the Americans of the 32nd were somewhere to their east, on the other side of this Japanese bulge, trying to link up. They were lost, but they were close. "We'll make so much noise over there," Jack pointed to the swamp, "that they'll have to come here, right into a pre-sighted kill zone. And when they do," he held up the flare gun, "we light the sky. Red, red, white. SOS. It was a desperate, suicidal, and utterly brilliant gamble. Malone's Foxhole, Forward, CP, December 18th, 1942, 11:40. It took Snowy 2 hours to crawl back to C Company CP and return with Captain Davies. The captain arrived in a low crouch, his face a mask of grime and disbelief. "Malone, they said you were... What in God's name are you doing?" Jack was elbow deep in the guts of the radio battery, stripping copper wire with his bayonet. His leg was propped up on an ammo box, an angry red stain seeping through the bandage. "Building a welcome party, sir," Jack grunted. He explained the plan. Davies listened, his expression shifting from confusion to incredulity, and finally to anger. "You're mad," Davies said flatly. "You're wounded. You should be at the regimental aid post. Instead, you're, what, playing with captured ordnance, rigging tripwires." "It'll work, sir," Jack insisted. "It will not work," Davies hissed, keeping his voice low. "It's a suicide mission. You're talking about luring them in. You're talking about making noise. That's the last thing we want to do. It'll give away every position we have left. It's against every tactical doctrine I've ever read." This was the clash, the textbook versus the bush, the officer versus the ringer. "With respect, Captain," Jack said, his voice level despite the pain. "The textbook is what got Kev neutralized. The textbook is why B Company is gone. The Japs wrote a new book for this place and we're not reading it. They know where we are. They're just toying with us. This is the only way to make them think we're stronger than we are, to make them commit, and to make them go where we want." Davies stared at Malone, a wounded, filthy sergeant who was calmly dismantling a hostile mortar round. He saw the logic. It was insane, but it was logic, and he had no other options. His flank was gone. His reserves were non-existent. "I can't authorize this, Sergeant," Davies said formally. "I'm not asking for authorization, sir," Jack replied. "I'm telling you what I'm doing. Me, Bluey, and Snowy. We're what's left. We're holding this flank. This is how." A long silence hung between them, broken only by the buzz of flies and the distant chatter of a machine gun. Davies finally nodded, a single sharp jerk of his head. "I was never here. I can't spare you any men. I can't spare you any ammo. And if you fire on our own positions, I'll have you court-martialed." "Understood, sir." "God help you, Malone." "He'd best, sir," Jack said, turning back to his wiring. "Because no one else can." The Swamp Edge, December 18th, 1942, 14:21. The work was hell. The heat of the afternoon was a physical presence, a wet blanket that choked them. Jack couldn't walk. He dragged himself, his wounded leg leaving a trail in the mud, pushing the heavy mortar base plates. Bluey and Snowy did the heavy lifting, wading waist-deep into the stinking black water of the swamp. Their workshop was a muddy pit hidden by mangrove roots. The materials: 3 Type 89 knee mortars, a dozen 50mm grenades, copper wire stripped from the radio, and a wrecked American Jeep nearby, 2 slow-burning fuses, the last dying radio battery, and their own personal weapons. The build: Jack was the brain, Bluey and Snowy the hands. The first part was the ghost line. "Set them 100 yards apart," Jack directed, his voice weak with fever from his wound. "Aim them away from the enemy, towards that thicket. We want the sound, not the impact." Bluey and Snowy wrestled the first mortar into the deep mud, bracing it with fallen logs. It was treacherous, exhausting work. Every splash sounded like a gunshot. Jack, his hands surprisingly steady, worked on the triggers. He took a 50mm grenade and carefully modified the fuse. He attached 2 lengths of copper wire to the percussion cap mechanism, then insulated it with tape. He did this 3 times. It was incredibly delicate. "This is for Phase 2, he explained. He connected the wires to the weak battery. "When I close the circuit, it'll send just enough juice to pop the cap. It's a remote trigger. For Phase 1, they used simple tripwires, strung low across the most likely infiltration paths." The sensory detail. The air was thick with the smell of decay and salt. Mosquitoes formed a living cloud around their heads. Bluey's hands were shaking so badly he dropped a grenade. It landed softly in the mud, fuse up. He and Snowy froze, staring at it. "Pick it up, Bluey," Jack said calmly, not looking up from his wiring. "It's fine. It's not armed." Bluey retrieved it, his face pale. By 21 it was done. The jungle was dark again. The 3 diggers crawled back to their primary pit, which was now just a prearranged kill zone. They had their Bren gun, 2 rifles, and Jack's Owen gun. They had set up 3 separate systems. The tripwires, set to fire 2 mortars, 50 yards into the swamp. This was the alarm. The fused mortar, a slow-burning fuse set to fire the 3rd mortar 30 minutes after the first. This would simulate a moving platoon. The ghost line, the 3 grenades Jack had wired to the battery. He held the 2 bare wires in his hand. When he touched them together, they would fire, simulating a second mortar position even deeper in the swamp. "It's a bluff," Snowy whispered, his teeth chattering. "The biggest bluff in New Guinea," Jack replied, checking his Owen gun. "Now, we wait." Malone's Foxhole, December 18, 1942, 23:05. The jungle was alive again. The silence was back, pressing in. Jack's leg was a universe of pain. He had taken his last measure of morphine, and it was doing nothing but making his head swim. Bluey was on the Bren, scanning the dark. Snowy was next to him, rifle at the ready. A click. It was tiny, barely audible. The sound of a boot snagging a wire. Jack tensed. "Stand by." Whoomp. The sound was shockingly loud in the stillness. A Type 89 mortar, 100 yards to their left. A second later, whoomp. The jungle erupted in Japanese. Shouts, cries of "Totsugeki!" Charge. Then a Juki heavy machine gun opened up. At the sound, tracers ripped through the empty swamp, shredding leaves and palm fronds 100 yards away from the Australians' real position. "Bloody hell, Jack," Bluey breathed, a hysterical giggle in his voice. They're shooting at nothing." "They're not," Jack whispered. "They're shooting at ghosts." The Japanese, believing they had stumbled into a prepared ambush, pulled back to regroup. The first test was a success. But Jack saw the flaw. It's not enough. They're cautious. They'll send scouts. They'll figure it out. He waited. 30 minutes later, as the jungle noise returned, the slow fuse on the 3rd mortar burned down. Whoomp. This one was 50 yards further into the swamp. More shouting from the Japanese lines. They were confused. The Australian position was moving. "Right," Jack said, his lips cracked and dry. "They're good, but they're predictable. They'll think we're a platoon, shifting position. Now they'll try a full frontal probe to pin us down." He looked at the bare wires in his hand, connected to the battery. This was his ace in the hole. "Get ready," he said. "They're coming." Malone's Foxhole, December 19, 1942, 01 hours, 07. This was the long night. This was the 6-hour hold. 01 to 30. The attack came. Not with noise, but with chilling, disciplined silence. A wave of shadows detached from the darkness. They weren't heading for the swamp. They were coming straight for the real position, the one that had fired on them last night. They had identified the listening post. "Wait for it," Jack breathed. His leg was on fire. The first Japanese soldier hit the small clearing 20 yards in front of their pit. "Now!" Bluey's Bren, Snowy's rifle, and Jack's Owen gun all opened up at once. They caught the first wave in the open. The effect was devastating. The attack stalled, the Japanese diving for cover. 02:45. The enemy was smart. They weren't charging blindly. They were now in cover, exchanging fire. A Juki gun was hammering the log parapet of their foxhole, sending splinters and mud flying. "They're pinning us," Bluey yelled. "They're going to try and flank us. That's what I want," Jack gasped. He touched the 2 bare wires together. Click, foosh, click, foosh, click, foosh. Deep in the swamp, 200 yards to their left, the 3 grenades Jack had wired to the battery discharged one after another. It sounded just like a mortar team engaging the flanking force. The Japanese firing at them paused. They were confused. They were being hit from 2 directions. The flanking element, believing they'd run into the main Australian line, pulled back. Jack, Bluey, and Snowy used the lull to reload. 04 Datrum. The ghost line had bought them an hour. But the Japanese were no fools. They realized it was a trick. The mortars from the swamp were inaccurate, firing wildly. The real threat was this single stubborn Bren gun. Now the true assault began. It was not a charge. It was a siege. Knee mortars began to rain down on their position. A shell landed just behind the pit. Crump. Bluey screamed. Shrapnel had torn through his back. He slumped over the bren, silent. "Bluey!" Snowy cried, shaking him. "He's gone, son!" Jack roared, pulling Snowy down. "Get on the bren! Get on the bren!" Snowy, weeping, scrambled over his friend's body and gripped the gun. 05:15. Jack was hit again, a rifle round high in the shoulder. His arm went numb. He was fading, the world narrowing to a pinprick. Snowy was firing the bren in short, panicked bursts. They were down to their last few magazines. The Japanese were massing for the final charge. Jack could hear the officers shouting commands. This was it. The ghost line had failed. "Snowy," Jack panted, his vision blurring. "The flare gun, on my belt." Snowy grabbed it. What do I do?" "Red. Red, white, aim high. It's for the Yanks. It's the only chance." Snowy stood up, his small frame silhouetted against the pre-dawn glow. He aimed the pistol at the sky and fired. Whoosh! A red star bloomed over the jungle. He fumbled, reloaded. Whoosh! A second red star. He reloaded again. A Japanese machine gun found him. The round stitched across his chest. He collapsed, but his finger pulled the trigger. Whoosh! A white star joined the red. SOS. Arrow 5:20. Jack Malone was alone. Bluey and Snowy were gone. His Owen was empty. His arm was useless. His leg was a block of dead meat. Through the smoke, he saw them. A Japanese officer, sword raised, 10, 20 men behind him. They were walking now. They knew it was over. Jack propped himself against the mud wall. He pulled his bayonet from its sheath. He was a digger. He was a ringer. He wouldn't die on his knees. He heard a new sound, a sound that didn't belong. Not the thump of a juki, not the crack of an Enfield. It was the heavy rhythmic ka-chung of an M1 Garand. It was the terrifying canvas-tearing brrrr of a bar. The Japanese officer paused, confused. He turned. The jungle behind him exploded. East of Malone's position, December 19th, 1942, 05:18. Lieutenant Frank Rizzo, 32nd Infantry Division, was lost, exhausted, and angry. His company had been trying to link up with the Australians for 2 days, island hopping through pockets of Japanese-held jungle. "Where the hell are we, Sergeant?" Rizzo spat, wiping sweat from his eyes. "Sir," his sergeant replied, "I think we're... well, I don't know, sir, but look." He pointed. Whoosh, a red flare. Whoosh, a second. Whoosh, a white. "SOS," Rizzo breathed. "Has to be the Aussies, but it could be a trap." "Sir, listen!" Rizzo strained his ears. He heard it. To the left of the flares, he heard the thwomp of Japanese knee mortars. He heard the thump-thump of a juki. It sounded like a massive firefight, but the flares were here, the SOS was here, and the main enemy force was attacking that beacon. Rizzo wasn't a ringer. He was a kid from Milwaukee, but he was a smart soldier. He looked at the flares, he looked at the main fight 200 yards away, and he understood. He saw the trap. "My God," he whispered, they're channeling them." He made a decision that was not in any textbook. This was the unthinkable act. He was not going to rescue the SOS beacon. He was not going to attack the main enemy force. He was going to complete the maneuver. "Charlie Company," he roared. "You see that firefight to the west? That's a phantom. It's a diversion. I want you to make it real. Open up on those mortar pits. Make them think they're being hit by a battalion. Baker Company," he yelled, pointing to the SOS flare. "That's our friends, and the Japs are hitting them from the front. We are going to hit the Japs from the rear. We are the anvil. Fix bayonets." The effect was instantaneous. Charlie Company unleashed a wall of lead into the ghost line, catching the Japanese mortar teams, who thought they were safe, in a horrific crossfire. And Baker Company, with Rizzo at the front, slammed into the rear of the Japanese force that was assaulting Jack Malone. The Japanese, who believed they were mopping up a single foxhole, were suddenly, inexplicably, caught between three forces. The stubborn Bren gun to their front, which they didn't know was silent, a massive new attack on their flank, Charlie Company, and a full-strength American company charging into their backs. It wasn't a battle. It was an annihilation. The trap Jack Malone had built with wire and phantoms was sprung not by him, but by an American lieutenant who had understood the plan without ever hearing it. Jack Malone woke up to a man in a different colored helmet leaning over him. "Easy, Aussie, easy," the American medic said. "You're all tore up." Jack's vision cleared. He saw American uniforms everywhere, securing the position. A young officer, Frank Rizzo, knelt beside him. "Sergeant," Rizzo said, his voice full of awe, "where's the rest of your company? The ones in the swamp?" Jack looked at the bodies of Bluey and Snowy. He felt a tear cut a clean line through the grime on his face. "Just me, and a few ghosts, mate," Jack whispered. You were good timing." Rizzo shook his head. "No, Sergeant, you were. You taught us how to fight in this green hell." The Malone Ghost Line was born. When Captain Davies arrived and saw the scene, the link-up with the Americans, the neutralized hostile force, and the jury-rigged mortar pits, he understood. The sheer, desperate brilliance of it was undeniable. The innovation spread. It was no longer one man's desperate gamble. It became a shared tactic. The US 32nd and the Australian 216th, now fighting as a combined force, began to adopt ghosting as a formal anti-infiltration doctrine. Field modifications, reliability, the flimsy batteries were discarded. Engineers from both armies created standardized firecracker boxes, small, preset explosive charges triggered by command wire. Offensive use, the tactic evolved. It wasn't just for defense. A joint Aussie-US patrol used it to take a key bunker. They set a ghost line 100 yards north of the bunker, complete with a bar firing on a fixed line. The Japanese defenders dutifully traversed their machine guns to face this new loud threat. The real assault team, armed with flamethrowers, then hit the bunker from the now undefended south entrance. Psychological impact. The ghosts began to weigh on the Japanese. Their intelligence reported phantom companies and shifting platoons. Their patrols grew more cautious, firing at sounds, wasting ammunition, and slowing their counterattacks. Enemy countermeasures. The Japanese adapted. They were not fools. They realized the sounds were often a diversion. They began using their own flares before an attack, trying to illuminate the phantom positions. They sent hunter teams not to fight, but to find the command wires. But the ghosts had done their job. They had broken the back of the infiltration tactic, sowing confusion and fear. They had given the Allies a weapon the enemy couldn't predict, the weapon of pure, unpredictable cunning. Jack Malone was evacuated. His war was over. His left leg was saved by a surgeon in Port Moresby, but it was shattered. He would walk with a heavy limp for the rest of his life. His shoulder would heal, but he would never again have the strength to be a ringer. The physical cost was absolute. The psychological cost was worse. He was hailed as a hero. He was the ghost of Buna, but in the quiet of the hospital ward, he was haunted. He saw Snowy standing up to fire the flare. He saw Bluey slumped over the bren. "I built the trap," he confessed to a nurse one night, his voice thick with fever. "But they were the bait." The innovation, too, had its costs. A week after Jack was evacuated, a US platoon, full of confidence, tried to replicate the ghost line. But they lacked Jack's bushcraft, his innate sense of the ground. They set their tripwires wrong. The mortars fired in the wrong sequence, luring a Japanese patrol directly on top of their own position. It was a massacre. The tactic required more than mechanics. It required artistry. It was a reminder that the ghost line was not a product of engineering, but of one man's desperate, unconventional mind. Captain Davies, for his part, carried his own burden. "I told him no," he admitted to Rizzo. "I ordered him to abandon the post. He refused. I sent him out there to die, and he saved us all. It cost him his men. It cost him everything." The victory at Buna was built on a foundation of such moral compromises and brutal necessities. The Battle of Bunagona ended in January 1943. It was a horrific, bloody, and total Allied victory. The Japanese beachhead was eliminated. The tide in New Guinea had irrevocably turned. The ghost line tactic was officially cited in after-action reports by both the Australian 18th Brigade and the US 32nd Division. It was praised as a decisive factor in breaking the enemy's infiltration doctrine and a model of inter-allied tactical cooperation. For his actions between December 18th and 19th, Sergeant Jack Malone was awarded the Australian Distinguished Conduct Medal, DCM, for his conspicuous gallantry and tactical brilliance. In a rare honor that spoke to the unthinkable nature of the American link-up, he was also awarded the American Distinguished Service Cross, DSC. The citation read, "While wounded and cut off, Sergeant Malone held his platoon's sector for over 6 hours against repeated, overwhelming enemy assaults. With all communications cut and his fellow soldiers neutralized, he utilized captured enemy equipment with extraordinary ingenuity to simulate a much larger force, confusing the enemy and channeling their main assault. His actions not only saved the flank of the entire brigade, but directly led to a successful, decisive counterattack by Allied forces. The legacy was immediate. The trust forged in the Boona mud between the Diggers and the Yanks, a trust sealed by men like Jack Malone and Frank Rizzo, would define the Allied island-hopping strategy for the rest of the war. They had learned to fight together. Toowoomba, Queensland, Australia, 1985. Jack Malone returned to Queensland. He never rode a horse properly again, but his quiet, patient understanding of the land made him one of the most respected ranch managers in the state. He never spoke of the war. He never mentioned Boona. His medals sat in a wooden box at the bottom of a drawer. His limp was a constant reminder of the mud, of the cost. A historian, decades later, would write, "The Malone Ghost Line was never a formal doctrine. It was not something that could be taught at a military academy. It was the desperate, brilliant, and unique improvisation of one man who understood his land, his enemy, and his own limitations. It highlights the core of the Australian digger spirit, a willingness to make do, to think outside the box, and to fight with cunning when all other hope is lost." Anzac Day, Sydney, 1985. An elderly Jack Malone stood watching the march. He was in Sydney to visit his daughter. He didn't march himself. His leg was bad in the autumn damp. He stood by the memorial, his eyes tracing the names of the fallen. Flanagan, Jensen, Sergeant Malone. Jack turned. The voice was American. The man was old, like him, wearing a small 32nd Division pin on his lapel. Jack squinted. I'm sorry, mate. Do I know you?" The American smiled. "We never formally met. Lieutenant Frank Rizzo, retired." Jack's eyes widened. He stared at the man. "Rizzo, the Yanks." "The Yanks," Frank confirmed. They stood in silence for a full minute, two old men looking at a stone wall. "I never forgot those flares," Rizzo said, his voice thick. "You were good timing, Lieutenant," Jack replied, his own voice quiet. "Good timing. You taught us how to fight in that green hell, Jack," Rizzo said, placing a hand on the Australian's shoulder. "You taught us to listen to the ghosts." Jack Malone nodded, turning back to the wall. He thought of Bluey and Snowy. He thought of the unthinkable act. It wasn't the American charge. It wasn't even the ghost line itself. The unthinkable act was hope. It was the idea that even in the mud, the rot, and the despair, a single spark of defiance could herd the shadows. That one man, wounded and alone, could set a trap for an army. And that 200 yards away, in the dark, a friend he'd never met would be waiting to spring it. He reached out and, with a gnarled finger, touched the name, Jensen. "We held the line, boys," he whispered to the stone. "We held it." Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe and click the bell icon so you never miss another dispatch from the front lines of history.